She was a millionaire heiress, beautiful, powerful, but trapped in a wheelchair after a tragic accident. At her cousin's wedding, she sat alone, ignored by the crowd, her heart weighed down by betrayal and pity. Then a single father stepped forward and asked her one question that no one else dared. "Will you dance with me?" What happened next shocked everyone in the room and changed her life forever. The chandeliers of the Manhattan Regent Hotel glittered like frozen stars, each crystal reflecting 1,000 fragments of light across the grand ballroom. Guests twirled in their gowns and tuxedos, champagne glasses clinked with polished ease, and laughter rose like the tide, filling every inch of the lavish wedding for Madison Blake. However, every sound was a reminder of what she had lost. At 32, she sat on the edge of the dance floor in her sleek wheelchair, chrome wheels catching the light, a silent observer in a world that had once been hers to conquer. She adjusted the ivory blazer over her slim frame, the choice deliberate. It gave her a sense of control, of authority, as if she could armor herself in power against the pity she could already feel pressing down on her from every corner of the room. The blazer said CEO, strong and capable, but inside, the woman beneath it felt fractured, suffocating under years of whispered judgments. Her eyes scanned the ballroom. She caught fragments of conversation. "She looks beautiful tonight, doesn't she?" "So brave, poor thing, after Ethan." The name alone was enough to twist her chest like a knife. Ethan Caldwell. 3 years ago, her fiancé, heir to an old textile dynasty, had stood by her hospital bed. The memory was seared into her bones, his hands trembling as he slipped off the engagement ring, placing it beside a wilting bouquet of roses. "I can't do this, Madison," he'd said, voice breaking. "This isn't the life we planned. I'm sorry." And then he was gone. Gone, along with the future she thought she had, leaving her with a chair of steel and a heart of glass. Tonight, those memories haunted her more than ever. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, her cousin Clara's wedding. Clara, radiant in white, gliding across the floor in her husband's arms, surrounded by applause and golden light. Madison should have been happy for her. But all she felt was the cold bite of envy, of isolation, of being a spectator in her own family's life. That morning, Clara had called with that careful voice everyone used now. "Are you sure you want to come tonight, Maddie? No one would blame you if you stayed home." Madison had forced a laugh. "It's your wedding. Of course I'll be there." But 3 hours later, she regretted every word. Every stiletto heel clicking against marble reminded her of what she could never wear again. Every whispered "poor Madison" burned her ears. Even the champagne tasted hollow, fizzing on her tongue, before fading into nothingness. Her father had given her the company after the accident. Blake Enterprises, builders of New York's skyline. She had been groomed to run it since 18, finishing her MBA while spending summers in construction sites, learning every bolt and beam. Taking the reins at 30 should have been her triumph. Instead, it had felt like charity. Princess, her father still called her, hovering at every turn. "I don't need a caretaker, Dad," she had told him countless times. "I need you to trust me." But even her success as CEO couldn't quiet the emptiness of returning each night to a silent penthouse overlooking Park Avenue. She had books, she had plans, she had money, but she had no one. Her spiral of thought was broken by a burst of laughter, light, pure, and unrestrained. She turned her head. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, darted between tables, chasing bubbles that floated from a small wand someone had carelessly left behind. Her violet dress billowed like butterfly wings as she giggled, clutching a battered teddy bear against her chest. She moved with a kind of freedom Madison envied, untouched by expectations or pity. The girl suddenly stopped in front of her, staring with wide, curious eyes. "Why are you sad?" she asked, voice sweet and direct. Madison blinked. "Sad? I'm not sad." "Why would you think that?" "Because your eyes look like my mommy's." "Before she went to heaven," the child said simply. She held out the teddy bear. "Mr. Teddy helps me when I'm sad. Do you want him to help you too?" For a moment, Madison was struck speechless. No adult had ever dared such blunt honesty since her accident. No one had looked past the chair to read the truth in her eyes. Before she could reply, a man's voice cut in. Warm, low and apologetic. "Emma, sweetheart. You can't just wander off like that." Madison looked up and her heart stopped. The man was tall, broad-shouldered but approachable, with chestnut brown hair tousled, as if he'd run his hands through it too many times. His hazel eyes held the same warmth as his daughter's, but deeper, layered with something: loss, resilience, an old wound. He wore a navy sweater over crisp dress slacks, casual in a room of tuxedos, yet somehow he belonged more than anyone else. He gave Madison an embarrassed smile. "I'm sorry about her. She gets curious." "It's not a bother at all," Madison said, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. "And what's your name, little one?" "Emma Carter," the girl replied proudly. "And this is my dad, Daniel." Daniel crouched slightly to meet Madison's eyes. He extended his hand with confidence, firm, respectful, not the fragile grip of someone afraid to hurt her. "Daniel Carter. I designed the lighting for this ballroom." Madison's eyebrows lifted. "Really? Well, then you deserve the credit. The way you layered the lighting, it creates warmth without harsh shadows. That's rare in a space this large." Daniel looked startled, then grateful. It was as though no one had ever truly noticed. His smile was small but real. "You know architecture?" "Blake Enterprises," Madison replied. She reached out her hand, her tone steady. "Madison Blake. We've been building New York for 3 generations. His handshake didn't falter, didn't treat her like porcelain. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Blake. Seems like we've got more in common than I thought." And for the first time in years, Madison felt the faint spark of being seen, not as a tragedy, not as a CEO, but as a woman. But the fragile moment shattered when a voice sharper than glass sliced through the air. Madison. A word now, it was her Aunt Evelyn. Tall, severe, every step carrying the weight of judgment. Behind her, Madison saw her mother and several relatives whispering, eyes narrowed in suspicion. The old pressure rose in her chest. Chains she thought she'd broken long ago. "Excuse me," Madison murmured to Daniel and Emma, already bracing herself for whatever storm Evelyn was about to unleash. As her aunt dragged her aside, Madison heard Emma's small voice ring out behind her. "Daddy, why's that lady so mad?" Did the pretty lady do something wrong? And for the first time in months, Madison almost laughed. Evelyn Blake's manicured nails dug lightly into Madison's shoulder as she steered her away from the warmth of Daniel and his daughter. They moved past the marble columns at the edge of the ballroom into a quieter hallway, where the music of the string quartet drifted faintly, muffled by thick velvet curtains. The further they went from the light, the tighter Madison felt her chest become, as if she was 16 again, being scolded for sneaking out with the gardener's son. Her aunt's voice came low, clipped and cold. "Madison, what do you think you're doing?" "What do you mean?" Madison asked, trying to sound neutral. "You know exactly what I mean. That man, that freelancer, Daniel Carter. Do you even realize who you were talking to?" Evelyn's tone sharpened with every syllable, slicing through the air like broken glass. Madison lifted her chin, refusing to flinch. "I was talking to the designer responsible for this ballroom." It was a professional conversation. "Perfectly civil," Evelyn gave a short, humorless laugh. "Professional? Civil? My dear, we did our homework. Daniel Carter isn't some celebrated architect. He lost his job at a reputable firm 2 years ago. He's been barely scraping by since. Single father, drowning in debts, chasing small projects to stay afloat." The words hit like a cold slap, but Madison refused to let her expression betray the sting. Instead, she glanced back toward the ballroom, where through a gap in the curtain she could see Daniel crouching beside Emma, the little girl holding her teddy bear up proudly for him to kiss. "He's a man who loves his daughter," Madison said softly. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Don't be naive, Madison. Men like him, men who've lost everything, they see women like you as an opportunity. You're vulnerable, alone, and more importantly, you're wealthy. He doesn't need to fall in love with you to change his life. All he has to do is convince you to fall for him." Madison's hands clenched around the wheels of her chair. She hated how quickly her aunt's words dug under her skin. Because wasn't that what Ethan had proven true? That love could disappear the second life became inconvenient? Was she doomed to repeat that mistake with another man, another heartbreak? Her aunt leaned closer, lowering her voice to a poisonous whisper. Do you really want to end up the tragic heiress who was taken advantage of by a desperate single father? For a long moment, Madison said nothing. She stared past her aunt, past the glitter of the chandeliers, into a space that felt like it was caving in on her. And then she straightened her shoulders, summoning the dignity that had carried her through boardrooms full of men twice her age who doubted her. I'm not 16 anymore. Aunt Evelyn, she said, her voice even. I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I can judge people's intentions for myself. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Really? Like you judged Ethan's? The name cut deeper than any insult. It was a deliberate strike, and Madison felt the floor shift beneath her, her throat tightening as if a hand had closed around it. Ethan, the hospital room, the cold metal of the ring he left behind. For 3 years, she had built walls so high around that wound that no one could see it. And yet Evelyn had found the crack. That was different, Madison murmured, her voice breaking despite herself. Different. Evelyn shook her head. At least Ethan had his own fortune. This man, this Daniel Carter, is nothing but ruin. His wife died of cancer, left him with medical debts he'll never recover from. He's been fighting a custody battle with her parents, who claim he's unfit to raise Emma. The courts might even agree with them. And you think it's coincidence he approached you tonight? Madison's gaze flicked once more toward Daniel. He was now speaking with the event coordinator, his hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder, his expression weary but gentle. There was no opportunism in his eyes when he'd looked at her, only something raw, something unguarded. And yet Evelyn's words burrowed like thorns, making her doubt her instincts. Her aunt softened her tone suddenly, as if realizing the blow had landed. We're just trying to protect you, dear. Your mother, your father, all of us. You've been through so much. We don't want to see you broken again. The orchestra in the ballroom shifted to a slower melody, a romantic ballad that hushed the crowd. Madison turned her chair slightly, peering back toward the dance floor, where Clara, radiant in her gown, was swaying in her husband's arms, the circle of guests surrounding them in adoration. A lump rose in Madison's throat, yearning, envy, something deeper, and then his voice. Madison. She turned. Daniel stood behind her, his expression uncertain, almost hesitant. His eyes searched hers with a kind of intensity that made her forget, for one dangerous second, the weight of Evelyn's warning. I know this may be out of place, Daniel began, his hands flexing nervously at his sides, but would you dance with me? The words hung in the air, cutting through the murmurs of the ballroom. Heads turned. A collective gasp rippled through the nearest tables. Madison's pulse hammered in her ears. Evelyn inhaled sharply, scandalized. This is outrageous, but Madison wasn't listening. She couldn't. Every part of her was torn between saying yes and bolting from the room. I don't think it's a good idea, she whispered. Her throat dry, Daniel took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Why, because of the chair? The bluntness stunned her. For 3 years, everyone else had tiptoed around her disability, wrapping their pity in euphemisms. He was the first to speak the truth without shame. Among other things, Madison admitted, her cheeks burning. Daniel crouched down, bringing his eyes level with hers. Ignoring the disapproving stares, ignoring Evelyn's audible scoff, he spoke softly. My wife couldn't walk the last 6 months before she passed. Do you know what she missed most? His voice faltered. Dancing. We still found a way. I held her. She moved her arms, and we swayed in that hospital room. Because dancing isn't about your feet, Madison. It's about connection. Her throat tightened. She blinked against tears that threatened to spill. I don't know if I can, she whispered. I don't either, Daniel said gently, his lips curving into the faintest smile. But maybe we can find out together. He rose and extended his hand. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Guests leaned in, curiosity and judgment thick in the air. Madison's aunt hissed her name. Her mother clasped her hands in anxious prayer, and whispers fluttered like moths through the chandeliers. Madison stared at his hand. Taking it meant stepping into danger, defying her family, opening herself to the possibility of being shattered again. But not taking it meant staying trapped in the gilded cage she had built for herself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she lifted her hand and placed it in his. Daniel's smile deepened, not triumphant but tender, as though he understood the magnitude of her choice. He guided her gently toward the edge of the dance floor, where the light softened and space opened. He rested one hand lightly on her back, raised the other holding hers and whispered, "Just follow me." And as the music swelled, Madison Blake, after 3 long, lonely years, felt something stir inside her. Not pity, not duty. Something alive, something terrifying, something like hope. The ballroom air grew heavier with each note of the string quartet's ballad, as though time itself had slowed to watch what was happening. A circle of space opened on the dance floor, created not by design, but by the stunned hesitation of wealthy guests who could not quite comprehend what they were about to witness. The whispers spread like fire, an heiress in a wheelchair, and a man no one of their circle recognized, daring to cross that invisible boundary. Madison's hand trembled faintly in Daniel's, but his grip was steady, grounding. He bent slightly toward her, his lips near her ear, and murmured, "Ignore them. Right now it's just you and me." She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Ignore them. She had spent her entire life under those eyes, those watchful stares, weighing her every move, what she wore, who she loved, how she walked, or in this case, how she no longer could. But when she looked into Daniel's hazel eyes, she saw no judgment, no pity, only an invitation. The music carried them forward. Daniel moved gently, swaying to the rhythm. At first, Madison's body felt stiff, her arm hesitant in his, but Daniel leaned closer, his tone quiet and soothing. "Don't think about the steps. Think about the music. Feel it here." He touched his chest lightly, right over his heart. Madison inhaled shakily. The strings swelled, and she let her body respond. Not with her legs, but with her upper body, the tilt of her shoulders, the way her hand rested in his. She found herself leaning into his rhythm, letting him guide her. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman in a wheelchair. She felt like a woman, alive, seen and held. From the edge of the floor, Evelyn gasped audibly. Madison's mother raised her hand to her lips, torn between horror and awe. Clara, the bride, caught sight of them mid-spin and smiled softly, resting her head against her new husband's shoulder, as though silently giving Madison her blessing. But the rest of the crowd remained rigid, confused between clapping or condemning. Daniel's voice came again, low and rough with emotion. "When my wife was in the hospital, sometimes she would cry at night. Not because of the pain, but because she thought she'd never be close to me again. Dancing was our way of saying, we're still us no matter what." Madison's throat closed around a lump of tears. She dared to look at him directly, and in his eyes she saw raw truth. Pain, yes, but also resilience. He wasn't flattering her. He wasn't pitying her. He was sharing a piece of his soul. Her heart pounded with a rhythm far louder than the orchestra. Each beat said the same dangerous thing: trust him, trust him. When the song ended, the ballroom erupted, not with the wild applause that normally followed a bride's first dance, but with the awkward patter of hands, uncertain whether they were witnessing something inspiring or scandalous. The claps felt restrained, forced, as if the guests were afraid to reveal their true opinions. Madison pulled back slightly, her breath shaky. "Daniel!" Before she could finish, Evelyn swept forward like a storm. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, her expression a mixture of fury and panic. "That's enough!" she snapped, her voice carrying. "Madison, we need to speak privately." Daniel stiffened, his hand still lightly against Madison's. "She's not a child. Mrs. Blake, she can decide who she speaks with." The guests gasped again, a ripple of scandal spreading. No one had ever dared to speak so bluntly to Evelyn Blake, matriarch of the Blake dynasty. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You don't belong here." Emma, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, clutched her teddy tighter and piped up in her small, earnest voice. Yes, he does. My daddy made the lights pretty. The innocence of the child silenced the room for a beat. Madison felt a sudden swell of affection toward Emma, a girl unburdened by social games, a girl who spoke truth without fear. Evelyn's face hardened. She turned back to Madison, lowering her voice but not her fury. This man, he's not what you think. We've looked into him. He's drowning in debts. He lost his job at a major firm. He's under investigation in a custody battle. He is not a safe choice for you, Madison. The words came like blades, slicing into Madison's fragile hope. Her pulse roared in her ears. She wanted to ask Daniel if it was true, if he had kept secrets, if she had been foolish to believe even for a moment that someone could look at her without ulterior motives. But then she remembered the way he had spoken of his wife, the way he had guided her with such care, such respect. Could a man feigning interest speak with such broken honesty? Daniel's jaw tightened. He straightened his back, his hand falling away from Madison's reluctantly. I won't defend myself in whispers, he said firmly. Madison can ask me anything, and I'll tell her the truth. But I won't let others decide for her. The courage in his voice sent shivers through her. Yet the old, suffocating grip of her family's control was coiling around her again, whispering in her mind, don't trust him. Don't risk it. Remember, Ethan. And then Emma's voice cut through once more, unfiltered and bright. Daddy, why is the angry lady trying to take the pretty lady away? Did we do something bad? This time Madison laughed. A soft, genuine laugh she hadn't heard from her own lips in years. And in that laugh was defiance, fragile but real. Her aunt's eyes widened in shock. Madison, but Madison raised her hand, silencing her. Enough, Aunt Evelyn. Her voice, though calm, carried the authority of a CEO who had steered boardrooms. I've listened to your warnings all my life. Tonight I'm listening to myself. The ballroom fell utterly silent. Daniel blinked at her, something like awe in his expression. Emma beamed, hugging her teddy. Evelyn seethed, but did not dare speak further. And Madison Blake, for the first time in years, felt like the chains around her heart were cracking. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was only the beginning. The applause died as quickly as it had begun, leaving the ballroom heavy with unease. The music shifted to another melody, but for Madison Blake, it felt like silence pressed against her ears. She could still feel Daniel's hand on her back, the phantom weight of it steadying her, warming her. Yet now it was gone, replaced by the icy grip of her family's expectations. Her Aunt Evelyn had retreated only a few steps, but her presence lingered like a shadow. Madison could see her whispering to two other relatives near the champagne fountain, their jeweled hands fluttering in scandalized gestures. Every sideways glance, every muffled murmur, pressed down on Madison until she felt the familiar ache of suffocation. She had spent her life under that microscope, every choice scrutinized, every slip magnified. But tonight felt different. Tonight, for the first time in years, she had dared to choose something for herself, even if it was as small as saying yes to a dance. Daniel leaned slightly toward her, his voice low, intimate, as though trying to cut through the noise of the world. You okay? Madison turned her head. His hazel eyes searched hers, not demanding, not judging, simply waiting. For a heartbeat, she almost said yes, but the truth sat heavy in her chest. No, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for 3 years. Before she could answer, her mother approached. Margaret Blake's expression was carefully composed, but her eyes betrayed worry. She reached out, smoothing an invisible wrinkle on Madison's blazer, a nervous habit from childhood. Darling, she whispered, maybe you should come sit with us. You've had quite enough excitement for one evening. Madison's lips curved in a brittle smile. I'm fine, Mum. Her mother hesitated, then sighed softly. You looked happy, Maddie. I don't see that often anymore. And with that, she drifted back into the crowd, leaving Madison stunned. Happy. The word echoed inside her like a foreign language. Daniel crouched beside her again, lowering himself to her eye level. The crowd behind him blurred, silhouettes in expensive dresses and tailored suits, whispering like wind through glass. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. But thank you. for trusting me, even for just a song." Something inside Madison cracked. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She turned her face slightly away, embarrassed. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't thank me. I don't even know what I'm doing." Daniel's lips pressed into a small, bittersweet smile. "Neither do I. But maybe that's okay." Emma appeared at that moment, weaving through skirts and legs, clutching her teddy bear. She plopped herself beside Madison's chair, her violet dress rumpled, her hair falling loose from its ribbons. She looked up with wide, trusting eyes. "You looked like a princess when you danced," she announced. Madison blinked rapidly, fighting another wave of tears. She managed a shaky smile. "Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know." The innocence of the child disarmed her more than any speech Daniel could have given. Emma didn't see a woman in a wheelchair, a CEO, an heiress, or a scandal. She saw a princess. But the fragile moment fractured again when Evelyn's voice sliced through the air, sharp enough to turn heads. "Madison, now." Her aunt's tone left no room for argument. Madison exhaled heavily, the tension returning like iron bars around her chest. She turned to Daniel. "I'll be right back." He nodded, though his jaw was tight. Emma reached out impulsively and grabbed Madison's hand, tiny fingers squeezing with surprising strength. "Don't be sad again, okay?" she whispered. Madison squeezed back. "I'll try." Evelyn led her through a side corridor, away from the chandeliers and music, into a smaller lounge lined with oil paintings and heavy curtains. The hush of the space was oppressive, the ticking of an antique clock loud in the stillness. Her aunt stood tall, arms crossed, eyes glittering with something between anger and fear. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Madison wheeled herself forward, her voice cool. "I was dancing with a man you know nothing about." Evelyn snapped. "We've investigated him. He's unstable. His wife's family is suing for custody of his child because he can't provide for her. He's drowning in debts, Madison. If you can't see what's happening here, then let me make it clear. He sees you as a lifeline." Madison's pulse quickened. "Custody battle. Debts." The words were heavy stones dropped into the fragile pool of her hope. Her chest tightened with panic. Was that why he had approached her? Evelyn's gaze softened just slightly, though her tone remained firm. "We love you. We're trying to protect you. You've been hurt once already. Do you want to open yourself to that again?" Madison swallowed hard. Her aunt's words dug into old wounds, tearing open the scar tissue she had built over years. Ethan's betrayal still echoed in her bones. The hospital room, the ring left behind, the crushing weight of being deemed unworthy of love. And now Daniel, a man with kind eyes and steady hands, a man who looked at her as though she were more than her chair. A man carrying secrets she hadn't known existed. Her aunt leaned in, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Don't mistake pity for love." The words stung like acid. Madison's jaw tightened. She met her aunt's eyes, and for the first time in years she didn't look away. "I know what pity feels like," she said quietly. "Daniel doesn't look at me that way." "Then he's a better actor than I thought," Evelyn snapped. Madison's chest heaved with the effort of holding back her fury. She had spent her life bending to this woman's authority, but tonight something inside her shifted. She straightened in her chair, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I'm 32 years old. I run an empire, and I will not let you dictate who I speak to, who I dance with, or who I trust." Evelyn's eyes widened, her mouth opening in shock. No one, least of all Madison, had ever spoken to her this way. Before her aunt could recover, Madison spun her chair, rolling back toward the ballroom with her head held high. Her heart pounded, her body trembled, but she refused to stop. When she re-entered the golden glow of the chandeliers, dozens of eyes turned toward her again. Daniel was waiting near the edge of the dance floor, Emma perched on his arm. He looked uncertain, almost ready to apologize for daring to ask her to dance, but Madison's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. For the first time since the accident, she felt alive, not despite her defiance, but because of it, and though she had no idea what storm was waiting for her beyond this night, she knew one thing with certainty. She had taken her first step, without her legs, but with her heart. The rest of the evening unfolded like a fragile play. Every gesture, every look, every word layered with tension. Madison remained near the dance floor, though she refused to rejoin her relative's table. Instead, she drifted on the outskirts, her wheelchair parked beside a marble column, watching Daniel and Emma move about the room. Daniel seemed aware of the stares, but unbothered by them. He carried Emma on his hip for a while, then let her down so she could chase the bubbles again, the violet folds of her dress sweeping like butterfly wings across the polished floor. Madison found herself smiling at the child's joy, even as her chest tightened with questions. Custody battle. Debts. A man with nothing to lose. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. She should have walked or rolled away, but she didn't. Something in Daniel's presence, something in the way he had knelt at her level, refusing to treat her like porcelain, had cut through years of loneliness. She needed answers. When the newlyweds disappeared for photographs, the atmosphere loosened. Guests filled their glasses, conversations bubbled louder, and laughter spilled again. Madison seized the opportunity. She maneuvered her chair through the crowd until she reached Daniel, who was adjusting one of the lighting rigs with the quiet precision of someone who cared deeply about details. "Daniel," she said softly. He turned, surprised, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. "Madison, I thought maybe you'd—" his voice faltered. "That you'd be done with me after—" "All that, I'm not," she admitted. Her voice came out more vulnerable than she intended. "But I need to ask you something. And I need the truth." His hazel eyes searched hers. For once, the easy calm in them was gone, replaced by something heavier. "Ask." She hesitated, glancing around at the crowded ballroom, the curious eyes still darting their way. "Not here. Could we step outside?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. He called Emma over, whispering to her. The girl skipped toward the dessert table, where one of the bridesmaids offered to keep an eye on her. With that settled, Daniel gestured toward the side doors. They moved together into a quieter terrace lined with potted palms, the night air cool against the warmth of the ballroom. Beyond the railing stretched the glittering skyline of Manhattan, towers rising like titans, their windows glowing with thousands of lives. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the hum of the city below filling the air. Madison's heart pounded. Finally, she turned her chair so she was facing him fully. "My aunt said things tonight," she began carefully. "About you, about debts, about—" "A custody battle." Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning his hands against the railing. His shoulders hunched, and for the first time he looked older than his 30-something years. "So they did their homework. So it's true?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rubbed his temples with both hands, as though bracing himself. Then he turned toward her, his expression raw. "Yes, it's true." Madison's stomach sank. "I was a senior associate at one of the biggest firms in the city," he said, voice low. "We were designing a luxury complex in Midtown. It should have been the peak of my career. But then my wife Rachel got sick. Stage 4. Aggressive. 2 years of hospitals, clinical trials, endless bills. I left the firm to take care of her. Sold our apartment. Took whatever jobs I could between treatments. By the end we had nothing left but debt, and Emma," his voice cracked on the name. He cleared his throat, blinking rapidly. "After Rachel died, her parents blamed me. Said if I hadn't taken her away from Boston, if I'd kept her closer to the family doctors, maybe she'd have lived. They filed for custody, argued I was unfit to raise Emma, and given the state of my finances—" He shook his head. "They almost convinced the court." Madison's breath caught. Her chest ached for him, for Emma. "You're fighting them?" she asked. "Every day." His jaw tightened. "For 6 months. I've taken on every freelance project I can find, just to prove stability. But it's not enough. The final hearing is in a week. If I lose—" He swallowed hard. "If I lose, they'll take her from me. And she's all I have left." The silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Madison stared at him, her mind spinning. Her aunt's warning echoed again. "He sees you as a lifeline. Why did you ask me to dance tonight?" she whispered. "Was it just because of that?" "Because of what I could give you." Daniel flinched. The question landed like a blow. He straightened, his eyes fierce, desperate. No, God, no. Madison, He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I don't expect you to believe me. But when I saw you sitting there tonight, you looked how I've felt for years, alone, surrounded by people but drowning in silence. I didn't think, I just wanted to reach you, to remind us both that life isn't over. Her chest constricted. He looked so earnest, so broken yet strong, standing against the glittering city. For once, she couldn't tell if her instincts were protecting her or betraying her. Inside, the music swelled louder, signaling another dance. Out here, the night pressed closer, intimate and raw. Madison lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can trust you. Daniel stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on the railing near hers. Then don't, not yet. But let me prove it. Let me show you who I really am. The city lights flickered around them, and Madison Blake, who had spent 3 years walled inside loneliness, felt the first cracks spreading wider, not of weakness, but of something she feared even more. Hope. The cool night air clung to Madison's skin long after she and Daniel had returned to the glittering ballroom. The chandeliers still spilled their light like frozen waterfalls, but everything looked different now. She knew things she hadn't known an hour ago, about debts, about a custody battle, about a man carrying grief on his shoulders like an anvil, but still standing tall for his daughter. She couldn't shake the image of him on that terrace, his voice rough with honesty, as he admitted the truth most men would have tried to hide. He hadn't begged for her help. He hadn't asked for her pity. He had simply laid bare his story, his wounds, his fight, and Madison couldn't ignore the ache it left inside her. As the wedding festivities continued, she kept watching Daniel. He moved through the room quietly, never drawing attention to himself, checking the lighting rigs, making sure the setup remained flawless for Clara's big night. Emma trailed after him like a shadow, skipping with her teddy in hand, her innocence untouched by the heaviness clinging to her father. Madison felt a tug in her chest each time Emma's eyes lit up, when Daniel bent to listen to her little stories, or when she proudly introduced him to other children as "my daddy." She had once imagined a life like that for herself. Husband, children, a home filled with warmth. Ethan had stolen that vision from her, leaving only silence and steel wheels. But tonight, watching Daniel and Emma together, she felt the ache of something she thought was gone forever, longing. Her thoughts were interrupted by her father's voice. Madison. She turned to see Robert Blake, patriarch of the Blake Empire, approaching. His silver hair gleamed under the chandeliers, his tailored suit immaculate. He carried himself like the man who had built half the city, every step heavy with authority. "Dad," Madison said cautiously. He studied her with sharp eyes, the same eyes that had once lit up when teaching her how to read blueprints as a child, the same eyes that had dulled with worry since the accident. Now they looked both stern and weary. "I saw you dancing." His tone was even, unreadable. Madison braced herself. And, for a moment, silence. Then quietly, "You looked alive again." Her chest tightened. She had not expected that. Not from him, but then his voice hardened. "Evelyn tells me this man, Carter, is unstable, a liability. If what she says is true, you'd be wise to keep your distance." Madison's jaw clenched. "Dad, Madison!" His voice cut through hers like a gavel. "You've spent years rebuilding your strength, running this company with dignity. Don't throw it away for someone who will drag you down with him." The words stung, because they came not from malice, but from fear. Her father loved her, she knew that, but he saw her as fragile, something to protect at all costs, even if it meant locking her heart in a vault. Madison's voice trembled with anger. "Do you know what drags me down, Dad? Sitting at family dinners while everyone talks around me like I'm not there, being pitied every time I roll into a room, being treated like I'm broken." Her father's expression faltered, pain flickering across his face. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "I don't need protection," she said firmly. "I need freedom." Later that night, after the wedding ended and the guests trickled out, Madison found herself lingering. The grand hall emptied until only staff remained, cleaning up champagne flutes and scattered petals. Clara and her husband had already left in a swirl of laughter and cheers. Daniel was packing his tools, carefully disassembling the lights he had so meticulously arranged. Emma was curled up on a chair nearby, fast asleep, with her teddy clutched to her chest. Madison rolled closer. "You're still here." He glanced up, offering a tired smile. "Occupational hazard. Last to leave, first to arrive." She studied him in the dimmed light, shadows under his eyes, the quiet weight in his movements. Yet there was also something steady, unshakable. "Daniel, why didn't you tell me about all of it earlier? The debts, the custody battle." He shrugged, his hands still busy with cables. "Because I didn't want that to be the first thing you knew about me. I didn't want to be just another sob story in your world of polished power." He paused, his voice softening. "I wanted you to see me, not my failures, not my wounds, me." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. God, she did. But doubt gnawed at her, the echo of Evelyn's poison, the shadow of Ethan's betrayal. As if sensing her hesitation, Daniel set down the cables and came closer. He crouched beside her chair again, his face weary but earnest. "I know what you're thinking, that I'm another man with nothing to lose, looking for a way out. But Madison, if I wanted money, I wouldn't have asked you to dance. I wouldn't have told you the truth. And I sure as hell wouldn't risk my daughter's future by dragging her into something false." The rawness in his tone made her chest ache. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded letter. He held it out. "What's this?" she asked. "The court notice. Final hearing. A week from now." His voice dropped lower. "If I lose Emma." Madison unfolded the paper with trembling hands. Legal language, stamped signatures, official seals, all spelling out the stakes. She looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "You can't lose her," she whispered. "I know." His voice cracked. "But I might." They sat in silence, the weight of the truth pressing down like the chandeliers above them. And then Madison made a choice. "Let me help." Daniel's head jerked up, his eyes widening. "No, Madison, this isn't charity. This isn't pity," she cut in, her voice fierce. "I've spent years trapped in a glass cage built by my family's fear. For once, I want to do something that matters, for you, for Emma." He shook his head, torn between gratitude and pride. "I can't let you risk everything for me." She leaned closer, her eyes blazing. "Maybe I need to risk something. Maybe I need to fight for someone other than myself. And maybe you need to let someone fight for you." The words hung between them. Fragile and dangerous, Daniel's lips parted as though to protest again. But before he could, Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring, "Daddy." Both of them turned. The little girl shifted, rubbing her eyes, then spotted Madison. A sleepy smile spread across her face. "Princess Lady," she whispered before drifting back to sleep. Something inside Madison shattered and rebuilt all at once. She turned back to Daniel, her decision clear. "I'm not walking away," she said. "Not from you, not from her." And in that moment, under the fading glow of the chandeliers, Madison Blake stepped fully into a fight she knew would change everything. The following week unfolded like a storm gathering over Manhattan. The wedding had ended, but the ripple of that night spread in ways Madison could not have imagined. Her family's whispers grew sharper, more insistent. Every phone call from her mother carried veiled concern. Every text from her Aunt Evelyn carried thinly disguised warnings. Even her father, Robert, had begun arranging meetings with the board of Blake Enterprises, as if preparing for an inevitable scandal. And yet Madison did not retreat. For the first time in years, she felt fire in her chest, a purpose beyond survival. Daniel and Emma had awakened something in her she thought she had buried with Ethan's betrayal, the courage to fight. On a gray Monday morning, Madison arrived at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. The building rose with heavy columns and cold stone, its steps crowded with lawyers, clerks and families, clutching folders like shields. A drizzle misted the air, the city's skyscrapers fading into fog above. She rolled her chair up the ramp, her father by her side. Robert Blake was silent, his jaw clenched, his presence both protective and oppressive. When they reached the entrance, he finally spoke. "Madison, you don't have to do this. You don't have to get involved in his mess." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "It's not just his mess. It's a little girl's future. And I won't sit back while they rip her away from the only parent she has left. Robert sighed, his shoulders heavy. He had built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but in this moment he looked like a man losing control of something he valued most, his daughter's safety. Just be careful. The world doesn't forgive women who make risky choices. Madison's lips curved in a bitter smile. The world doesn't forgive women who make any choices. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with tension. The family courtroom was smaller than she expected, less grand than the ballrooms she was used to, more claustrophobic, the air thick with whispered arguments and nervous glances. Daniel was already there. He stood near the wooden bench, dressed in his best suit, a navy jacket that fit a little too loosely, a tie knotted with care but slightly crooked. He looked tired, but when his eyes found Madison's, something like relief softened his face. Emma sat beside him, swinging her legs, her teddy bear perched in her lap. When she saw Madison, she waved with a bright smile. "Princess Lady!" The name made Madison's heart clench, both with joy and sorrow. Across the aisle sat Rachel's parents, the Carmichaels. Wealthy, polished, faces carved with grief and bitterness. Mrs. Carmichael's pearls gleamed against her black dress, her eyes sharp as glass. Mr. Carmichael's hands rested on a leather briefcase, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on Daniel like he was something unclean. The bailiff called for order, and the judge entered, a woman in her 50s with stern eyes and a reputation for being ruthlessly fair. She glanced over the case file, then looked up. Case number 4721. Custody of minor Emma Carter. The Carmichael's lawyer stood first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, the child's welfare is at risk. Mr. Carter cannot provide a stable home. He is deeply in debt, unemployed by any reputable firm, living paycheck to paycheck on small freelance projects. He cannot guarantee proper education, healthcare, or emotional stability for Emma. The Carmichaels, on the other hand, can provide a home of security, wealth, and family support. It is only logical that Emma be placed in their care." Madison's stomach twisted. She glanced at Daniel. His face was calm, but his hands were clenched tightly on the bench, knuckles white. When it was his turn, Daniel rose. His voice was steady but laced with raw honesty. "Your Honor, I may not have wealth, I may not have prestige, but I have love. Emma is my daughter. She is my life. I've worked every day, every hour I can, to provide for her. I've cooked her meals, bandaged her scrapes, read her bedtime stories. When she cries, I'm the one who holds her. When she laughs, I'm the one who hears it first. Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy the bond between a father and his child. And I will fight to my last breath to keep her," the courtroom murmured, a ripple of emotion breaking through the sterile air. Then, to Madison's shock, Evelyn Blake stood up from the gallery. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached the Carmichael's side. "Your Honor," Evelyn said smoothly, "if I may add perspective, I am Madison Blake's aunt. Our family knows Mr. Carter's situation well. While he may mean well, he is unstable. My niece has been charmed, misled even by his sob story. But I can assure this court, Mr. Carter is not a fit guardian. He is a drowning man, and he will drag anyone down who tries to save him." Gasps filled the courtroom. Madison's breath caught in her throat. Her own blood, her own aunt, was aligning herself with the Carmichaels. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Order." Madison's pulse thundered in her ears. She could remain silent. Let the lawyers battle it out. Let her aunt's poison spread. Or she could act. She wheeled herself forward, ignoring her father's warning hand. Her voice rang clear, strong, filling the room. "Your Honor, I request to speak." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Blake, this is highly irregular, I know. But this case isn't just about money or reputation. It's about truth." Madison's voice shook but grew stronger with each word. "I have seen Daniel Carter with his daughter. I've seen the love, the bond, the stability he gives her, something no pile of money can replace. Emma is not a project. She's not an accessory to showcase at family dinners. She is a child who belongs with her father." The Carmichaels bristled, but Madison pressed on, her eyes blazing. "My aunt talks of being misled. I say she's blinded by prejudice, by the idea that only wealth equals worth. I know what it is to be pitied, to be told you're not enough. And I will not let Emma grow up believing that lie. She deserves to know that love, not status, is what makes a family. The room was silent. Even the judge leaned back, studying Madison with a new intensity. Daniel's eyes glistened, his lips parting as though he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Emma clutched her teddy tighter, her gaze fixed on Madison with innocent trust. Evelyn's face flushed crimson, fury and humiliation battling for dominance. Robert Blake sat frozen, torn between pride and fear, and Madison Blake, for the first time in 3 years, felt her voice echo, not just in the room, but in her own heart. She was not broken. She was not fragile. She was a woman who could fight, for herself, for others, for love. The judge cleared her throat. We will take a recess before hearing further arguments. The gavel struck, and the room erupted in murmurs, but Madison barely heard them. Daniel moved to her side, his voice low, thick with emotion. You didn't have to do that. Yes, she whispered, her eyes meeting his. I did. And in that moment something shifted, not just in the case, not just in the courtroom, but in the fragile space between them. This was no longer just Daniel's fight. It was theirs. The courthouse hallways hummed with restless energy during the recess. Lawyers paced with cell phones pressed to their ears. Clerks carried stacks of files that threatened to spill, and families whispered in corners like conspirators plotting their next move. But for Madison, the noise faded into a dull hum. Her hands trembled against the armrests of her chair, her heart still pounding from the words she had just spoken. She rolled herself into the small alcove near the windows, where the city stretched out in grey drizzle, its skyscrapers looming like silent judges of their own. Robert Blake followed her, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble. He said nothing at first, his lips a thin line, until finally he spoke. Do you realize what you just did? Madison's voice was steady. Yes, I told the truth. You told the court you believe in him, Robert snapped. In front of the Carmichaels, in front of your aunt, in front of every reporter lurking outside. If Daniel Carter loses, it won't just be his reputation ruined, it will be yours. And Blake Enterprises will take the blow too. She turned to face him, her blue eyes fierce. Then let it. Because if we're willing to sacrifice justice to save our image, maybe we deserve the blow. For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other, two wills colliding. Robert's face softened, but only slightly. You sound like your mother, he muttered, almost wistfully. She never cared what society thought either. And it nearly destroyed her, or maybe it freed her, Madison whispered. Before Robert could respond, Daniel approached. His tie was loosened, his eyes still raw from emotion, but his voice was firm. Miss Blake. Madison, thank you. For what you said in there, she shook her head. Don't thank me. Thank Emma. She's the reason I spoke. As if summoned by her name, Emma peeked from behind Daniel's leg, clutching her teddy bear. Are you my fairy godmother? She asked with solemn seriousness. The question nearly broke Madison's composure. She bent slightly forward, her voice gentle. No, sweetheart, but I'm someone who believes you should stay with your dad. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to humming softly to her bear. Back inside the courtroom, the judge called the session to order. The recess is concluded. We will now continue with evidence. The Carmichaels' lawyer presented documents, bank statements showing Daniel's dwindling savings, eviction notices from his old apartment, medical bills stacked like a mountain. Each page was a weapon, slicing into his credibility. The Carmichaels sat tall, their expressions grim with righteousness, as if justice itself were on their side. Then came their witnesses. A neighbor testified that she had heard Daniel arguing on the phone late at night, implying instability. A former employer spoke of his sudden resignation during his wife's illness, painting him as irresponsible. The lawyer's words wrapped around these testimonies like barbed wire, constricting Daniel into the role of an unfit father. Madison clenched her fists. Each accusation felt like a dagger, not only into Daniel, but into the little girl, sitting quietly with her teddy bear. She glanced at Daniel. His face was pale, but he stood tall, refusing to flinch. Finally, it was their turn. Daniel's lawyer, a weary but sharp-eyed man named Heiress, stood. "Your Honor, while my client may not be wealthy, he has demonstrated unwavering commitment to his daughter. To counter these claims, I call forward a character witness, Miss Madison Blake." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Evelyn nearly leapt from her seat. "Objection!" she hissed. "This is a circus." The judge's gavel cracked. "Overruled. Proceed." Madison wheeled herself to the witness stand. The clerk swore her in, and she placed her hand on the Bible, her fingers trembling. She looked out at the room, at Daniel, at Emma, at her aunt's furious glare, and began. "I met Daniel and Emma just a week ago," she admitted. "But in that week, I have seen more truth than I've seen in years of business and boardrooms. I've seen a father who sacrifices everything for his daughter. I have seen a little girl who is happy, safe, and deeply loved. Yes, Daniel has struggled financially, but his struggles came from caring for his dying wife, not from neglect or recklessness. He chose love over profit, compassion over ambition. That is not failure. That is strength." The Carmichael's lawyer approached with a smirk. "Miss Blake, forgive me, but isn't it true that you barely know Mr. Carter? That you have personal reasons for defending him?" Her cheeks burned, but she held firm. "It's true I haven't known him long. But truth doesn't need decades to reveal itself. I've seen enough to know Emma belongs with her father." The lawyer's eyes gleamed. "Or perhaps you're projecting your own loneliness, your own condition." He gestured toward her wheelchair, his voice dripping with cruelty. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Madison's spine stiffened. The air seemed to thicken, but she refused to shrink. "My condition," she said coldly, "has taught me to recognize resilience. And Daniel Carter has it in abundance. Don't you dare use my chair as an argument against his worth as a father." The lawyer faltered, stammering for words. The judge's gaze turned icy. "Counselor, another remark like that, and you will be held in contempt." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Daniel's eyes were wide with admiration, his jaw tight with pride. Emma clapped her little hands, oblivious to the tension, and whispered, "Go fairy godmother." For the first time in years, Madison felt something deep and immovable inside her, a conviction that no one could tear down. That night, the weight of the day lingered long after the gavel struck adjournment. Madison returned to her penthouse, but her thoughts stayed in the courthouse. The city lights twinkled outside her window, yet the silence in her apartment felt heavier than ever. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You were incredible today." "Thank you." Auntie Madison read the words over and over. Her heart pounded. She typed, deleted, retyped. Finally she sent, "Emma deserves the truth." "So do you. Don't give up." She set the phone down, staring at the reflection of herself in the window, no longer the woman who only watched from the edges of life, but someone willing to step into the storm, somewhere across the city. Daniel sat with Emma asleep in his arms, reading Madison's message with tears in his eyes. And for the first time in months, hope flickered, not just for the custody battle, but for something neither of them had expected, a future together. The courtroom was silent, so still that every shuffle of paper and creak of wood echoed like thunder. Judge Ramirez adjusted her glasses and peered down at the files stacked before her, her expression unreadable. Madison could feel her pulse in her throat, heavy and relentless, as though her entire being had been tied to the next words spoken in that room. Daniel sat stiffly beside his attorney, Heiress. His jaw was clenched so tight it seemed his teeth might break. Across the aisle, Evelyn Carmichael sat like a marble statue, her pearls catching the sterile light. Her lips curved into a faint smile of victory already claimed. Emma was with a court-appointed aide in a quiet room nearby, shielded from the tension. Yet Madison could almost hear her little voice echoing through her memory. "Are you my fairy godmother?" Judge Ramirez cleared her throat. "This case has been difficult, not only because of the evidence presented, but because of the humanity that lies beneath the surface. Custody disputes are rarely about who loves the child more. They are about who can best provide stability, safety, and continuity. The words sank like stones into the silence. Madison's hands tightened around the arms of her wheelchair. She knew what was coming. Judges valued stability, money, property, power, all things the Carmichaels had in abundance. The judge continued. The court acknowledges the financial challenges Mr. Carter has faced in recent years, as well as the extraordinary sacrifices he made while caring for his late wife. We also acknowledge the concerns raised by the Carmichaels regarding Emma's future security. Evelyn's smile widened. Her lawyer sat taller, but the single word broke the air like lightning. We must also consider the testimony provided, the documents presented, and the first-hand observations of this court. What I have seen is a child who flourishes in her father's care. What I have heard is a man who has made mistakes, yes, but always in the service of love and responsibility. And what I have witnessed is a family, dynamic with the Carmichaels that, despite their good intentions, appears motivated by control rather than compassion. Sadi, murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge. Ramirez leaned forward, her gaze steady. Therefore, this court grants full custody of Emma Carter to her father, Daniel Carter. The Carmichaels will be entitled to visitation rights, supervised until further review. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air like a spell, too fragile to touch. Then Daniel exhaled sharply, his face collapsing into his hands. Heiress clapped him on the back with rare emotion, muttering, "You did it, son." Madison felt tears streaming down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Relief, fierce and overwhelming, crashed over her like a tidal wave. Evelyn's face twisted, her lips trembling with rage as she stood abruptly. "This is a travesty," she hissed. "We will appeal." The gavel struck.
Order. This court is adjourned. The room erupted into noise. Reporters rushing for the exit, family members whispering, attorneys gathering files.
But Daniel didn't move. He turned to Madison, his eyes red-rimmed, his expression somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. You saved us," he whispered. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, you saved her. You never stopped fighting. I just made sure they listened." Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, replaced by a crisp winter light that washed the steps in silver. Daniel carried Emma in his arms, her little head nestled against his shoulder. Madison rolled alongside, their trio a small island of peace amid the chaos of flashing cameras and shouted questions. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel? Ms. Blake, are you romantically involved with your client? Do you think your family will retaliate against your testimony?" Security tried to hold the crowd back, but the questions were relentless, hurled like stones. Daniel's grip on Emma tightened. Madison reached over, placing her hand gently on his arm. "Don't answer them. Not today." Together they slipped into the waiting car Heiress had arranged. As the doors shut, the noise outside dulled into a faint hum. Emma stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Are we going home now, Daddy?" Daniel kissed her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home." Madison's chest ached at the word home. She wondered what it would mean for her, for them. That evening, Daniel invited Madison to join them for dinner. His apartment, still modest, still cluttered with bills and sketches, felt warmer than any penthouse she had ever lived in. Emma insisted on setting the table herself, carefully placing mismatched plates and proudly presenting her father's famous spaghetti, which was little more than noodles and jarred sauce. Yet as they ate, laughter bubbled easily. Emma told knock-knock jokes that made no sense. Daniel groaned at the mess of sauce splattered across the table, and Madison found herself smiling until her cheeks ached. At one point, Emma leaned across the table, her voice serious. "Oh, Daddy, can Madison be my fairy godmother forever?" Daniel froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. His eyes met Madison's, searching, questioning. Madison reached across the table, taking Emma's small hand in hers. "I don't know about fairy godmother," she said softly, "but I'd like to be something even better." Emma's eyes widened. "Like what?" Madison smiled. "Like family." Weeks passed. The court ruling stood firm, despite Evelyn's threats of appeal. Daniel began his new position with Blake Enterprises' Sustainable Design Division, a role Madison had created, yes, but one he earned quickly with his skill and vision. Projects that had once been dismissed as dreams took form under his leadership. His office walls filled with blueprints and models, his evenings filled with Emma's laughter and Madison's companionship, but their relationship was not without tension. Robert Blake, ever cautious, confronted Madison late one night in her study. "Are you in love with him?" he asked bluntly. She looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, and what happens when the world finds out? When they say he only wanted your fortune, your name, your company, they'll be wrong," she said simply. "And if they can't see that, then that's their problem, not mine." For a long moment Robert studied her, his stern facade softening. "You've changed," he said finally. "You used to live for the family image. Now you live for yourself." "No," she corrected gently. "Now I live for us, for the family I chose." 6 months later, on a spring evening filled with blossoms and golden light, the community center Daniel had once dreamed of opened its doors. Built with his designs and funded by a partnership with Blake Enterprises, it stood as a beacon of renewal. With ramps and spaces designed for inclusion, art classrooms for children, and a rooftop garden where families could gather. At the ribbon cutting, Madison stood beside Daniel, Emma perched between them like the heart that bound them together. Reporters snapped photos as the crowd applauded. But for Madison, the world seemed to narrow to just this moment. The warmth of Daniel's hand on hers, the pride in Emma's smile, the knowledge that together they had built something real that night. After the celebration quieted and Emma had fallen asleep, Daniel and Madison sat on the balcony overlooking the city. The stars blinked faintly above, the hum of traffic far below. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked suddenly. "Standing against your family. Choosing this life instead of the easy one you could have had." Madison shook her head, her eyes soft. "No, because this life, the one we're building, it's real. It's messy, it's hard, but it's ours. And for the first time in years, I'm not watching from the sidelines. I'm dancing." Daniel leaned in, pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was slow, tender, filled with everything they had endured and everything yet to come. When they pulled apart, Madison whispered, "So, does this mean I get to be Emma's fairy godmother forever?" Daniel chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No," he said. "It means you get to be her mother." Tears blurred Madison's vision as she nodded, her heart overflowing, and as Emma stirred in her sleep inside, clutching her teddy bear, the three of them, broken, healed, remade, finally became what they were always meant to be, a family.